Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to answer a question that a lot of people ask me here on the channel. After all, which sweetener is the best? Is sucralose bad for you or not? And what about aspartame? Does it cause cancer or not? Is stevia the best of them all? Is erythritol really safe? If you've ever been confused by all the sweeteners available and don't know which one is best for cooking, which one is best to put in your coffee, if it can be used by children, by pregnant women, you're going to love this video. It's a sweetener manual. Stay until the end, you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask you, if you use sweeteners, which one do you use? Or do you not use anything to sweeten your food on a daily basis? If you still use sugar, what type of sugar do you use? I would love to see your comment. Write it for me down below in the comments, and don't forget to like the video. I did a lot of research to make this video, so the way you can give back is by leaving your like. That really motivates me here on the channel. It also shows YouTube that you support and trust my content. If you know someone who also has questions about sweeteners, I know so many people do, go ahead and share this video. Let's expand this chain of kindness. When we think about sweeteners, we basically think of four main uses. First, it's to sweeten those everyday drinks. Tea, coffee, maybe a more acidic juice we drink, a smoothie. The second is to sweeten a dessert, a cold one, like yogurt, mousse, ice cream, gelatin, or a pudding that doesn't go on the stove. The third is the sweetener that actually goes in the oven or on the stove, the one you use to make a cake, cookies, syrup, or truffle. The fourth use of sweetener is precisely as an ingredient that gives structure to a recipe, replacing sugar. When you think about the sugar you use every day in recipes, when you add it to a dish, it doesn't just sweeten. Sugar adds volume to the recipe, gives it texture, gives color, caramelization, softness, fluffiness, structure, and even retains moisture. So, depending on the sweetener you use, you can't achieve these results in your recipes. For example, there are sweeteners that reach a syrupy stage, that caramelize, that become like a shiny pudding syrup, and there are others that don't reach that point, they sweeten, but they can't bring that moisture, caramelization to the recipes. So, depending on the sweetener you use, you'll also get different culinary results. Before I start talking to you about the main types of sweeteners we use in our daily lives, I need to give you a very important warning, which is about the amount of sweetener used. Of course, each one of them in excess can cause different harms. I'll talk about this more specifically for each one. But one thing I can already tell you is don't keep using sweetener as if just because it doesn't contain sugar or calories, it's totally unrestricted. A calorie-free food isn't necessarily something you can consume freely. Sweeteners have an established upper daily intake limit, and there are people who don't take this seriously. There are people who don't measure sweetener in drops, they measure it in squirts. And I'm saying this seriously, not as a joke. People who add it to their smoothie or coffee say 1, 2, 3 squirts. That's not how you're supposed to do it. We have to count the drops. And I know that sometimes it can be a process of readjustment because since sweeteners are, in some cases, even sweeter than sugar itself, your own palate might already be addicted to this ultra sweetness of the sweetener. This is an important point for you to try to readapt your body because this ultra sweetness, in fact, you won't find in natural preparations. That ultra sweetness from sweeteners, you won't find it in a mango, in a strawberry, in a natural food when you make a homemade dessert. And it's important for us to retrain our palate as well. Now let's talk about the main types of sweeteners, because I know that's what you want and which one to choose, depending on your own situation. I'll start by talking about sucralose, because it's a very popular sweetener and widely used in daily life. It's one of the most commonly used because for many people, it's the one that most resembles sugar in taste. It sweetens a lot, so we can use a small amount. And since it works well, usually in drinks, tea, coffee, yogurt, in recipes, so many people have it in their daily routine and use it every day. Then some people ask me, Patricia, can I use sucralose on the stove in the oven for cooking? It will always depend on the manufacturer, so this is something you'll always have to read on the sweetener's label. Because it may have some specific combination, since when sucralose is used together with polyols, it usually has greater heat stability. There are some studies that say pure sucralose at high temperatures can release some compounds that are not beneficial for the body. So once again, check the product label, because if it is suitable for cooking, it will say so, suitable for oven and stove. That's one point, and it's already a really good tip for you to follow. The practical point for everyday life is also to consider the amount, because for some people, some report intestinal sensitivity to sucralose. So there are people who feel their digestion works differently. They feel a certain intolerance in this regard, and in practice, it's your body that will determine that. If you use it and have no issues, that's fine. There's no problem at all. There are people, and studies have mentioned in the past, that sucralose can increase your craving for sweets because the taste of sucralose is really very sweet. So, that issue of ultra sweetness I mentioned to you, if you start adding it to foods and drinks, maybe this will mask your tongue, your palate, in relation to sweetness and make you keep seeking out that sweet taste. If you are someone who, even using sucralose, is able to have control, doesn't get that excessive craving for sweets, and can control the rest of your diet, then that's fine. There's no problem at all. But if you notice that by using sucralose, it's changing your relationship with sweets, and you find yourself seeking out more sweets, at other times, sometimes even real sweets with sugar, it might be worth reconsidering whether it's worth using sucralose or not. From a culinary standpoint, it sweetens really well, but it doesn't give you that syrupy consistency, and it's not a sweetener that will make your cake soft and moist. So there are people who say, the recipe turned out sweet, but it didn't have the texture of a cake when I used sucralose. And then it's worth considering what you prefer more, the taste or the consistency, the structure of the batter. Remember that there is one that works super well, I'll talk about it later, that works really well for cooking, for culinary preparations. There is a sweetener that is often sold together with sucralose. When you look at the label, not just on the sweetener itself, the kind you use in juice, coffee, and so on, but also in processed foods, drinks, sodas, yogurts, it's Acesulfame K, which is potassium acesulfame. It's a sweetener that you're not going to buy at the pharmacy or supermarket as a package of Acesulfame K, but it's present in many products we consume daily because it helps stabilize flavor and usually performs well in processed foods. It's heat stable. So on its own, if you bought it, it gives a kind of metallic aftertaste, but since it's often used together with sucralose, they actually complement each other very well. So it's important for us to look at food labels to see what type of sweetener we're consuming. Practically speaking, it works well in recipes, which is why it's widely used in the food industry. But there's still that point, it's not because it's 0 calorie that you can use it freely in any amount, and since you're probably not going to buy it directly in your town, it's just one less thing to worry too much about. The main thing is that it's present in products like yogurts, sodas, and everything else. Pay attention to how much you're drinking. Because a lot of people say, I switched to diet soda so I can drink as much as I want. But there are sweeteners in it, so we still need to keep that in check in our daily lives. Just because it's 0 calories doesn't mean it's unlimited or should be consumed without moderation. Now let's talk about aspartame, which is one of the most controversial sweeteners in history. It sweetens really well, has a pleasant taste, especially when we use it in cold drinks or cold desserts. It's not recommended for cooking because it's not very stable at high temperatures. So it's not recommended that you reheat your coffee after adding aspartame or that you bake a cake with it. Usually it doesn't work very well for those purposes. Many people are afraid of aspartame. They're afraid it could cause health problems, cancer, or that it's contraindicated. Currently, for the general population within the appropriate intake limits, which, as I mentioned, every sweetener must have a maximum limit, there is no problem with it. International regulatory agencies classify it as a low-risk sweetener when consumed in daily life. The real problem usually isn't using a sweetener like aspartame occasionally, such as in a coffee or a dessert that contains it, but rather how much it's consumed overall. The problem is excessive consumption, because in excess it can be harmful to us. An aspartame sweetener does in fact have a clear and important contraindication, which is for people with phenylketonuria. This specific problem is when a person is born with a deficiency in an enzyme that metabolizes phenylalanine, and this causes that amino acid to accumulate in our liver and can lead to neurological damage if there isn't strict control from birth. The good news I want to share with you is that the test that determines whether or not you have phenylketonuria is that heel prick test, which the baby takes at the maternity ward right after birth. If you have phenylketonuria, you already know about it since you were born. It's not like, oh my God, do I have it now? No, if you had it, you would already know, because this is a very important screening that's done as soon as a person is born. In fact, if a person is born with phenylketonuria, they cannot consume aspartame under any circumstances. Now, if you don't have this health condition, which is serious and needs to be detected as soon as possible, and if you consume a normal amount of sweetener in your daily life, just a few drops here and there, aspartame can be used in your daily routine, normally, without any problems. Now let's talk about saccharin and sodium cyclamate, which are older sweeteners, but many people still use them because of their accessibility. Because they are cheaper sweeteners, saccharin has that well-known metallic taste, which for many people is bothersome, especially when it's sold on its own. But when it's mixed with another sweetener, it becomes more tolerable, and it ends up being relatively heat stable. So, it can work for hot drinks and some recipes if you can handle its flavor, which is a bit more metallic. Another sweetener that is also very controversial is sodium cyclamate, which is also a very economical sweetener, widely used by many people because of its price and also because of its taste. Many people like it, have been using it for a long time, and have gotten used to its taste. This issue with cyclamate can be a bit more controversial because back in the 1960s, some studies were done with rats. They were given very high doses of cyclamate, doses that are unrealistic, huge amounts of cyclamate per pound of body weight, and the rats had a higher probability of developing bladder cancer. Because of this, in some countries, it was banned at that time, and this was never revisited. It has remained banned to this day. Now, it is allowed in several countries. It's permitted in Europe, Brazil, Australia, Canada. So, within the safe, basic amount, which is what I always talk to you about here, and if it is legally sold in your country, there is usually no problem at all you consuming sodium cyclamate. Now, if you don't feel comfortable because you know about this study, there are several other options for you to vary throughout the day. Remember that it is also often present in diet products you buy without you even noticing. So if this is an issue for you, like, oh, I don't want to consume it, check the label to see if it's there or not. I just want to make an addendum here regarding cyclamate and saccharin. As you see it in the name, sodium cyclamate, sodium saccharin, they both have sodium. So if you're using a ton of it every day, aren't you technically upping your sodium intake through sweets? In a food where you wouldn't think there was sodium? That's one more thing for you to think about, and whether that's an issue for you or not. Now let's talk about the favorites nowadays. Sugar alcohols, polyols, xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol, maltitol, these are sweeteners that are being used more and more because they're considered more natural options and also provide an interesting culinary effect in different preparations. They even look visually similar to sugar. They're like little white granules, kind of transparent. So they add texture, volume, and give that sugar-like feel to the recipe. So for baking, for people who make recipes to sell, or even for a party cake, and want that real dessert look, like a fluffy texture and a nicely caramelized syrup, these are the sweeteners you'll likely need to choose because they can truly deliver that appealing and professional culinary appearance. They sweeten well and they give a slight cooling sensation in your mouth. When you put it straight in your mouth, you notice it melts a bit and it feels slightly cool. So it's really sweet and it has an interesting quality. Now, it ferments a lot in the intestine. Depending, xylitol, basically, even sorbitol and maltitol ferment a lot. They draw a lot of water into the intestinal lumen. And if you're more sensitive, or if you consume a large amount, it can cause some kind of diarrhea, gas, or intestinal discomfort. Of all of these, the one that usually works best is erythritol, which people tend to tolerate better. That's why many times people also buy stevia blends with one of these, with erythritol or xylitol. So that you can sometimes dilute the sweetener a bit, so to speak, it can be an interesting option. It's worth mentioning to you that many people consume it without experiencing diarrhea as well. Once again, it all comes down to adjusting the dose. Even this sweetener, which is natural and more similar to sugar, if consumed in excess, can be harmful to the gut because it can ferment more. So once again, always be careful with the amount. This sweetener works really well for making syrup, pudding syrup that actually caramelizes. It works well for making homemade ice cream, homemade cake. In short, anything you can think of where you would use sugar, it works well there and it fulfills that role very well. It's worth mentioning that the issues I mentioned, like gas, bloating, and even diarrhea, are very individual. There are people who consume it and feel all of that, and there are people who consume it and feel absolutely nothing. So the tip I give you is, if you start consuming it, pay attention to your gut, see if you become more sensitive or not. If you do, just switch to another one that causes you fewer issues, so you don't end up with these intestinal issues, which are really unpleasant. Lastly, there's the class of more natural sweeteners out there, which are stevia and monk fruit. Just a reminder, I have a video about each of these here on the channel if you want to know more in-depth details. I'll leave a playlist down below with different types of sugar and sweeteners, where I talk about several of them here. So stevia, obviously, it's talked about a lot and is very popular. It's sought after because of its very high sweetening power and because it's heat stable. And a lot of people like the idea that it's natural, still a plant, which is cool. The biggest issue really ends up being sensory, because many people notice that aftertaste. That slight bitterness that stays on your tongue afterwards, especially when the dose is very high or when the extract hasn't been properly adjusted, or even for personal reasons, sometimes the person is just very used to the effect of ultra sweeteners and is looking for that in stevia, but stevia won't give you that. It will bring a more natural flavor. So that's why they often make a blend with erythritol, like I mentioned to you, because then you get the sweetness from the erythritol and also that natural aspect from stevia. But it's worth checking how much of each is in that blend, because sometimes there's 1% stevia and 99% erythritol. So you need to make sure you're actually buying what you were looking for. Monk fruit as well, also known as lohanguo, has been increasingly used, and I think it has the most well-rounded flavor of all for many people. And it's very interesting because it also often comes mixed with erythritol. So sometimes, once again, pay attention to the proportion because sometimes you think it's just monk fruit, but in reality, you're buying a blend with a large amount of polyol, and that can cause intestinal issues for many people. So it also goes into recipes. Check the label because if you're looking for a pure one, sometimes it will be more expensive, so you have to see if it's worth it or not. Many people want to know if sweeteners are allowed for pregnant women, for breastfeeding women, for children. How does that work? For these specific populations, it's always very important that you talk to the professional who is following your case. Absolutely, if you are pregnant and you need to use a sweetener, you should be under the care of a nutritionist or a doctor. So it's important that you talk to them so that in your specific case, they can check, according to your history, which option would be most suitable for you. I think the most prudent thing during pregnancy and breastfeeding is to try to seek out the natural sugars from foods, from fruit, from vanilla, from cinnamon, from spices. And if it's especially important for you, for example, if you're a pregnant woman with diabetes and you need a little sweet treat or a bit of sweetener from time to time, talk to your doctor, the one who sees you in person. According to your profile, your nutritionist or doctor will give you personalized advice. And in the case of children, it's the same. The ideal is to try to get them used to the natural sweetness of fruit from an early age, rather than replacing sugar with an ultra-sweet sweetener, which can condition their palate. But obviously, there are also type 1 diabetic children or children who have developed some condition that requires a sweetener. In these cases, it's always important to talk to the professional who is treating them. One detail I want to point out for you to pay attention to is that if you are replacing sugar to improve blood sugar control to avoid glucose spikes, remember that often just removing sugar won't help you with that. Because if you substitute sugar for sweetener in a cake, but still use a lot of white flour, chocolate powder, it won't help you because these behave like sugar in your body. So the ideal is for you to have this perspective that there are foods that quickly turn into glucose. And what the body absorbs in the intestine isn't sugar or flour or pasta, it's glucose. So if you eat too much of it and it turns into glucose, you're not really gaining anything. You're just switching one problem for another. Of course, cutting out sugar always helps, obviously, but remember the rest of your diet. No sweetener will make up for too much calories, a sedentary lifestyle, an ultra-processed diet, or too many simple carbs with a high glycemic index. That's not what I'm trying to tell you. Sweetener is a tool, but it's not a magic solution to solve all your problems. It would be nice if it were. So tell me now, which sweetener do you use? Which one have you tried and hated, or maybe had some culinary issue or problem with it? Like stomach pain? Really bad taste? Which one do you love the most? Which one is never missing from your home? Or if you don't use any, I'd love to see your comment. Remember to like the video, that's really important to me, and to share it because everyone needs these tips. Let's expand our chain of kindness. That's what I want here on the channel. See you next time. Bye.